This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, welcome into B-Town's 2021 Year in Review episode, our final episode of Season 4. Can you believe it? Here we are. If you're a new listener and hopped on board with us as part of the growth we've seen this year, thanks so much for joining in. If you're a loyal listener from get-go and have spread the word, whatever it is, much appreciated as we continue to grow this project. Today, I welcome a panel of some of Rhode Island's top journalists, Alexa Gagosz of the Boston Globe, Jim Hummel of the Hummel Report, and Steve Klamkin of WPRO for a discussion and some analysis on some of the biggest stories of 2021 and looking forward to 2022. Remember to follow me on social media at Bill Bartholomew. And if you want to go a step further, support the Bartholomew Town podcast for as little as $3 per month by becoming a B-Town Insider. Simply head to patreon.com/BartholomewTown or click the support link wherever you're listening right now. All right, so here we are, December 2021, time for one of our most popular episodes of the year, last year anyway, the last couple of years, and that is our Year in Review Roundtable. What a roundtable we have here, folks. The one and only Alexa Gagosz of the Boston Globe, Jim Hummel of the Hummel Report, and the voice of WPRO News, Steve Klamkin. There they are.
Hi.
Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. So we were kind of going over the topics and what the biggest stories of 2021 were. There's some obvious things that jump out. There's no question about it that at least in the top one or two would be COVID-19 and how it hasn't wrapped up in any way, shape, or form. Really, it's still there. It has changed. It's no longer the press conferences at the vets and the kind of inundation on a hour by hour basis that it was. But as we see Omicron and just generally COVID resurging here in Rhode Island and everywhere, frankly, it's clear that it's still basically the biggest story of the year. So I guess let's start with Alexa. You've been inside many of those press conferences. You've been covering this extensively for the Globe. Your big takeaways on COVID in 2021 and as a story, what it's meant for Rhode Island.
Yeah, absolutely. If we thought that 2020 was jam-packed with headlines, our minds were kind of blown by 2021. I thought going into this year that we were going to cover the vaccine rollout hard for the first few months, and then it was going to all be about economic recovery, checking in on small businesses and how they were doing, how people who were laid off in hospitality and tourism industries were holding up, and how what the healthcare industry looks like in a post-pandemic world. I couldn't have been more wrong on that front. The vaccine rollout, which started as a bipartisan issue, has quickly had politics seep into it. COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations are up once again. And while all this is happening, the people in Rhode Island who have largely been forgotten, the unhoused in particular, are struggling now more than ever.
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously, we're seeing some attention on that issue with Senator Cynthia Mendez and Matt Brown doing their sleep out, although there's been people who have been working on this throughout the entirety of COVID-19. Crossroads, House of Hope, other organizations have been paying attention to this. Now, all of a sudden, the response from whether it's Governor McKee or the General Assembly as a whole is more public facing, as I think largely to do with that protest outside of the State House. Jim, what have you seen? You've covered a lot of interesting stories that have had to do with small business and their relationship with COVID-19. And also, of course, on a lively experiment, you have a front row seat to the week-to-week developments on this issue. What have you seen?
Well, I think the big disconnect is that for years, Steve, we've been covering we're facing a $400 million deficit, $500 million deficit. The state's flush with cash now. Yeah. So there's this disconnect that, the businesses, I know the restaurants are concerned about maybe an indoor mask mandate and all of that coming. But in terms of the finances, we've got a lot of money. And I covered Governor DePrete back in the late 80s, and it went from $100 million surplus, which think about that in 1989, to like these huge deficits. And I remember him telling me it's a lot easier when you don't have money because the answer is no to everything. Now, everybody wants a piece of the pie. And so, are they moving quickly enough? Are they not? Senator Mendez, we talked about this on Lively over the weekend. And I think even Rob Horowitz, the political strategist, said, a day or two is fine. And then, how much he said she should be working inside the building rather than outside the building, which is a good point.
Yeah, and that's some of the criticism that I've heard on that over the weekend. They also had some of their tents destroyed by the wind, and they were kind of asking for donations. And then talk about that progressive civil war. Some of the other progressive factions are saying, well, why are you asking for donations for a 10 for you? How about a donation for a 10 for somebody who's literally living under an overpass right now? So tricky stuff there. Steve, of course, you've been out on the street and really one of the most active reporters in the state, obviously. And what have you seen throughout the course of COVID this year? What has stuck out to you?
Well, fortunately or not, I find myself in those news conferences every week or twice a week, however often the governor and health people come together. But I think that the COVID story is stories 1 through 5, if not 1 through 10 for the year, because it just reaches into every part of our lives. I tend to think of the political overlay here, as you all mentioned, and Jim, you rightly mentioned the fact the state is flush with cash. How much of it has been spent? Very little, and I think that gives fuel to those in the political world who say, "What are our leaders doing? What are they acting on?" We heard the legislative leadership say, we can't just throw money around willy-nilly. We have to have systems in place and have the justification for everything, which is true. But those who say, are they dragging their feet so that they can be doling out money during an election year? I think this gives them fuel, to feed the political aspect of it.
Think of where we were a year ago. Raimondo was money left and right in the legislature. I think partly because it was an election year. Nick Maniello didn't want to make any missteps. That really helped him, didn't it?
Yeah, right.
And I think she was handing out the money. Now they want a deliberative process. So all of a sudden, no, we don't want to go too quickly, and this is a once in a lifetime. Where were you a year ago during all this? The legislature basically was on the beach for the entire part.
No, they gave her the keys. They gave her the keys and carte blanche to do what she felt needed to be done to deal with the pandemic. And basically she did that.
Steve, what happened to all that plexiglass? $166,000. Where did that go?
I don't know. I think it's gone. I think I stuck my nose in and it's gone. I don't recall.
Yeah, it's not there anymore. It's not set up, that's for sure. And it's interesting. I just did a roundtable ahead of this with the topic was the year in Rhode Island music. So I had some music journalists and venue owners and so on and so forth. It was 25 and a half minutes of COVID-19 and navigating from a business standpoint. And that was the big thing that came up was this is a moment they're talking about a mask mandate indoors that's likely coming. What if they close bars early again? Those 2 hours, that's big revenue. And the state's sitting on piles of cash. That doesn't sit well with a lot of the small businesses, especially those in hospitality.
Did you guys all jam at the end of that podcast?
We might have, if not for having to jump on with you guys, which I'm glad to have done. No question about it.
You got the drums set up in the background.
I got the drums set up in the background. Great. That's my great. COVID victory right there.
Well, again, though, it just points out what I think is that it has just reached into COVID has reached into every aspect of our lives. And it's generated, as Alexa, you pointed out, it's generated no end of political to and fro, on different ends of the political spectrum. It's become it always was a political issue. Everyone will read into it what they choose, and the beat goes on, so to speak. Yeah. Nothing has really changed in that regard. So we're in for more of the same, I think, in 2022.
Yeah, buckle up.
Not to pull out my crystal ball. There it is. I think we're going to be covering COVID-related stories for the next few years, it seems.
Yeah, it's scary. And who would have thought? I remember back in, I think I've shared this anecdote before, but the very first couple of days that COVID-19 hit Rhode Island, we're in the bunker at the Department of Administration and everyone was set up and tons of confusion and no one knew what was going on. I remember Ronaldo Almonte. He was bringing like this giant mixer. He had like this whole set of bottles of water. He basically like brought a campsite for himself. And he looked at me and he was like, bro, get ready. You're going to be here for the next 2 to 6 weeks. This is going to be our life. 2 to 6 weeks. Here we are almost 2 years later and it's not wrapped up. Last thing on COVID, and Alexa, I think you'll have some insight into this for sure. I think we all would, but going back to Alexa, the role that, or I guess the relationship between the media and the general public. Anytime I mention COVID-19, if I'm in a public space, be it on the radio, whatever, I mean, the email, the calls is just completely divided. There's people who say we should basically be locked down right now. And then there's people who, you look at these freedom fighters, Paul Rihanna and that whole group, and they have a completely different opinion on things. What role has the media played in shaping the narrative of COVID-19 versus, say, public health experts? How have we gotten to this point where we literally have two different hot takes on COVID as a whole?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think that one of the biggest issues that we're seeing, and not just in Rhode Island, not just in Providence, but on a national scale, is the misinformation around COVID, the misinformation around vaccines. And that is also playing into I don't want to get vaccinated because I think that it's, an experimental vaccine, when public health experts are saying that's not the case. And there are systems that are in place to make sure that we're not giving an experimental drug to somebody. However, in Rhode Island, we are split at this point. In Providence, we have on the progressive scale, as well as other cities such as Central Falls and Pawtucket. You look elsewhere, though, go to Burryville and whatnot, and you're going to have someone who's a little bit more conservative. Maybe perhaps the type of voter who was disappointed when, Minority Leader Blake Phillippe announced that he wasn't going to run for governor. So right now there's a whole balancing act, and Governor McKee is kind of in the center of it. We're at the point where we might have a mask mandate for all places indoors. McKee could announce that today, tomorrow, sometime this week. However, he also has to weigh into the fact that small businesses don't want this. They're saying that once we say that there's a mask mandate, people aren't going to come into restaurants. People aren't going to shop in boutiques on Westminster Street in downtown. So he's trying to weigh the economic and the health side of things. And we're stuck in a huge issue on we're the media. We need to portray the right information while at the same time balancing all these opinions.
Yeah, wild stuff. There's no question about it. And I've heard from plenty of business owners who have said, including today on this roundtable I had beforehand, the last taping I just did, look, we don't want to be the police. Give us some guidelines. If it's a mask mandate, if it's a vaccine or testing mandate, fine. But don't make us as small business owners the people who have to be the bearer of bad news. We'd rather deflect it to the state. So it's interesting. Then you have the Jessica De La Cruzes of the world who, think this whole thing is somehow, just part of the New World Order takeover of Rhode Island. So it's
one last point, Bill, before you move
Yeah.
on. We talked about this on Lively over the weekend. How about some metrics? You remember the pause that's been going on forever and ever. So why doesn't the governor come out and say, okay, if we're going to base it on science, look, we're heading into the heart of the winter, the holiday. Why don't we go for 3 weeks and let's see where the numbers are?
Yeah.
Instead of an open-ended thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Did that last year.
Yep. The pause. Exactly.
Yeah, the pause. Mm-hmm.
Which of course Twin River was still open, and that caused a lot of skepticism and controversy during that. So it's weird stuff. I mean, it's one of those things where who knows what's going to happen? I mean, that's the reality of it. And until we have any kind of metrics, like you say, Jim, it's going to be tough to even assess it and say, this works, this doesn't work, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, this guy's a quack, this guy's spot on, whatever it is. And right now it gives freedom for people to manipulate numbers to their liking to make their own point, I guess. Moving on. So Governor McKee, here he is. A year ago, there were rumors that Governor Raimondo was going to go to Washington, D.C., but for the most part, they were dismissed. Of course, she did her famous 2-week hiatus from the media, close contact with COVID. Probably some huddling was happening during that time with respect to the Biden administration. That's an assumption, but seems about accurate. In any case, Dan McKee becomes governor of Rhode Island, and in a time where he was basically shut out of the cabinet during COVID-19 for the most part. What is the McKee doctrine? What have we learned about Dan McKee in the last year and his gubernatorial tenure, and also his positioning as a candidate going into 2022? And we'll start with Steve.
Oh, I think it starts with the number 39.
Yeah.
The governor has steadfastly maintained he is the mayor who became governor and counts on his experience as mayor and feels that he wants to be representative of all 39 cities and towns in Rhode Island, and has carried that into the so-called corner office. That, I think, guides his principle is he wants to be inclusive. He's been having these online meetings to map out the path to 2030 and, putting out a call for good ideas and what should the state look like in 10 years and essentially leaving it to others, I think. I'm not sure what that's going to look like. And he has even made a point of he might only have a 1-year impact on the state, and he wants to try to make the most of it. That's, I think, his doctrine is to be inclusive and to, be representative of all 39 cities and towns. That's the theme that we've heard throughout here from McKee. I'm not sure that he counts on the longer term, but he's, for all intents and purposes, positioning himself to run. He's been very coy about it and says, as most politicians do, I'm just focused on the present and, getting the job done and making Rhode Island safe for COVID and so forth. So I don't know, maybe some of you have better insights than I do, but I'm not sure. I haven't sat down with him, an extended period. I mean, we talk frequently, but not about the future.
I did a lot of stories on him when he was lieutenant governor, trying to push to get that small business money out the door. And I remember the famous quote. He said, I'm a backup quarterback. He said, not only do I not have a team, I don't have a jersey. And so, but I wasn't worried. I mean, look, he has enough managerial experience. The concern I have is what I call the Cumberland cabal. He's got this tight, Tony Sylvia, man, that was tough. It was personal versus some questionable ethical things going on. Who are his set of advisors? Who's talking to him? And so now, we have the chief of staff, we have the ILO contract, and most recently, he can't win on the vaccine bonuses. Is it better that he comes out and says it's a mistake and own it? Or does that look like, who's running the show here? How did that initially get in? The rollout was horrible on that. It's a good management technique to give a bonus so it's not rolled into your base pay and your pension and all of that. They do it all the time. It's just somebody who wasn't thinking it through suggested let's wrap in the vaccine and we got to get the shots in the arms and all of that. So you only have so much political capital, and I think the governor was given a lot of bonus points early on. Why not? The budget's great. Vaccines, the vaccination rates is one of the highest in the country, but these missteps add up. Will they add up? Look, we're months and months and months before we get into the heart of the primary season. But are people going to remember that? But then again, who's going to step forward and look like a stronger leader? So these are the things that go through my mind. Seth Magaziner's putting out all these, passive aggressive press releases. A real leader should do this. It's like, just shut up. It drives me crazy when I see that. But they're trying to get airtime.
Yeah, that's the strategy there. No doubt about it. Alexa, your take on Governor McKee?
If we look back, when McKee took over as governor, people were frustrated with Raimondo. Of course, she hadn't addressed the media or, frankly, the state of Rhode Island for a long time. And it looked like it was McKee's race to lose in 2022. The economy, like you said, Jim, it was reopening. The business community, particularly small businesses, felt like they were being heard for the first time in a while, and people were getting vaccinated. And now we have a really crowded Democratic primary ahead of us. And there's a lot of differences in opinions between, say, McKee and the Rhode Island Political Cooperative, whose candidates are currently sleeping outside in tents, right outside the State House, trying to call attention to the homelessness issue in Rhode Island. On the other side, and I really don't think that we've talked about it this much in the media in general, But there's a lot of people who were surprised and frankly disappointed when Minority Leader Blake Filippi announced that he was not going to run for governor. So who's going to be on the GOP side? It's going to be an interesting race, but it's still early.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I had been keeping in touch with Minority Leader Filippi over the course of, I don't know, the last few months. I saw him at one time out on Block Island. He was in his truck driving around, blasting music with the windows down. And when I saw him in that moment, I was like, and I even said this on Lively. I remember, Jim, when I was on last time, I don't know that Blake Filippi wants to run for governor. He's got a good life. He's got a number of businesses. He's including Ballard's out on Block Island. He's got his truck. He's got this, he's got that. And he's probably the most visible and prominent Republican in the state. But that leaves a gaping hole where, you've got Sue Cienki calling McKee King McKee. At the same time, he's getting killed from the progressive side. So what is the opposition and what would it look like? The only thing that would make sense would be for somebody who can win more than just the extreme side of the Republican Party. You need somebody who can pull in independents. But who is that?
But Blake Filippi's looking at the history of Rhode Island governors. So look, there is a path for Rhode Island governors. Ed Dupree was there, and then it was Sunland for 4 years, but then it was 8 years of Link Ahmed and Don Kachiri. So the path is there, but Kachiri found out the hard way. The bully pulpit only goes so far. Once you get in, what does the governing look like when you have an overwhelmingly Democratic General Assembly? And no matter how moderate or whatever you are, you know that the Speaker of the House is the most powerful person. So I think as he goes through, I haven't talked to him about this, but the calculus for anybody running as a Republican is once you get in, what do you do? Because they haven't built the farm team. And Kachiri made a huge mistake when he got elected in 2002. 2004 was the time he should have gone out and spent all of his capital to get General Assembly seats to at least get near to sustaining a veto on the budget, right? And he didn't do that. Then he got reelected in 2006 and he just kind of gave up. So they lost seats, and look at where you are now with the Republicans. So it's an unenviable job for Sue Cienki, but I just think it's winning. Winning is not the issue for the Republicans. It's where you go after Inauguration Day.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. No question.
Made all the tougher these days by Trump, who has, turned a lot of Democrats into vehement anti-Republicans. The Republicans are probably always going to get that third of the electorate, quarter to a third of the electorate. But, how do you grow that is a good question. As we're recording this, there's a very interesting article in the political scene in the Providence Journal looking at who are the prospective Republican candidates. They might have one in each of the general officer races, maybe. No one's really, other than Charles Calenda in the race for Attorney General, has really made not a splash, but just made an announcement I plan to run. It's almost like a deep, dark secret who's going to be running.
Steve, there's not a lot of Mark Zacharias around, are there? Who was willing to run and just to be on the ballot.
Any and all offices.
Exactly.
My great guy. But he really was the standard bearer for a number of years on the Republican Party. We've often said, my news director, Bill Haberman, says, we really kind of miss not having a two-party state in this state because it leaves everything to the Democrats who get whatever they want, basically.
Yeah.
And we don't have there is the so-called loyal opposition. You can go to the Blake Filippis and get reaction and commentary, but it's not a lot more than pot shots because, as you point out, Jim, they don't have anywhere near the prospect of sustaining or overriding a veto.
Steve, I think the closest they came was in 1983. Remember that they did the redistricting? Rocco's, I know I'm dating myself.
Before my time. No, it was just before my time.
They had a lot of Republicans back after, and then the redistricting and the special election.
So I understand. Yeah. And, you go back to I came in when just before, when Sunland was in office. So you had a wave, sort of a wavelet of Republicans who were elected to statewide office, governor, general treasurer, and Attorney General Jeff Pine. And in interest of full disclosure, I worked for Nancy Mayer for a time after she was elected. So, and it, even in those days, you had to deal with the legislature that was solidly controlled by Democrats. No prospect of Republicans coming to the fore.
Yeah. And, look, Paul Pence, Dave Darlington, I mean, even the independent conservative lieutenant governor run potentially of Joe Trillo. I mean, these just seem like token races, who in reality from a GOP perspective can win more than 35%.
I take it back. I think Paul Pence has said he intends to run. Yeah. I don't think Trillo has. I think that's, speculation on the part of some people. And Alan Fung's name has been banned. But these are names that are bandied about. No one has really come out and said, I'm seriously looking at running next year. No, I say no one. I say Kalinda and Pence, I think, are the only. I could be wrong.
Yeah, going to be interesting to watch that, and also how does this political co-op factor in as well? I guess that's the other big factor.
Just thinking back, I mean, not that we've elected any, third party candidates, but the third parties are out there. Not strong at the moment. We haven't heard from them in a while, but they have made a splash in the past. So, and have, I don't know, played kingmaker, but in the case of the Cool Moose, Bob Healy, may have influenced the outcome of a race or two.
Hey, Bill here, wishing you and yours happy holidays and a happy new year. This is the last episode of season 4 here on the Bartholomew Town podcast. And as we head into year 5, I've got some exciting stuff coming up that I can't wait to share with you. But I just want to thank all of you for your support, your trust, your enthusiasm. It means the world to me. And obviously, you can't grow a podcast without a listenership. That's you. And that's the number one thing to me, is the connection that we've made here over the last few years. It's just been this incredible blend of journalism and fine arts, really, this creation of this podcast that has taught me so much and given me an opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do, which is to be a broadcaster. And it means the world to me. I don't know what else to say. I just wanted to break in here and give you that announcement. Big stuff coming up in 2022, to reiterate. And now back to our Year in Review 2021 podcast with Alexa Gagosz of the Boston Globe, Jim Hummel of the Hummel Report, and Steve Klamkin of WPRO News. Tough to imagine the Libertarian Party has any traction on a statewide basis. I mean, even if Pat Ford were to return from his media journey to be the face of that party, I mean, and he probably is the most prominent person there, not even close to enough to make any literally make any run in a statewide election. All right, so on that, bring Pat Ford up. Dead silence. There it is.
Bill, you're the only one I ever hear in conversation raising the Libertarian Party, because frankly, we don't hear from them that much.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Notwithstanding Pat, who comes to all the governor's press conference,
or Billy Hunt on A Lively Experiment. Moving on, crime in Providence. I mean, on the one hand, it's like Providence is a safe city relatively. I mean, you can go out, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Nobody's behind a dumpster ready to jump out and, drag you into the pits of hell or something like that. But there have been optically challenges. There's no question about it that it's factored into Elorza's remote chance to become governor, and probably his decision to not run for governor, how he handled some things over this past summer. Your assessments on crime in Providence, is it a major statewide issue? And just in terms of optics and economics, I mean, how does that factor in? Or is this something overblown to sell mattresses and cars?
I'll start with this. Providence is like everywhere in the country. It's seeing high profile shootings. There's a lot of guns out there on the streets, and police are seeing more shell casings at crime scenes than really ever before. Over the summer, I remember there was one weekend where there was a shooting literally every night. I think it was Thursday to early Saturday morning. But the issue of ATVs is also ongoing. People aren't being killed by the ATV riders. However, at the Globe, my colleague Amanda Milkovits, who's been covering crime in the city for, 2 decades, we dissected data over the summer to show where exactly the 911 calls were that were reporting ATV riders. And we found that it wasn't just one neighborhood or section of the city, but it was a problem that residents in Providence were feeling everywhere, from the east side to Mount Hope to, the south side of Providence. It was just everywhere. And around that same time, there was that big story where a woman was dragged out of her car by an ATV rider and beaten at a traffic light, while the woman's friend was in the passenger seat and her daughter and a puppy were in the back. That ATV rider was a woman from North Providence, and she was sent to jail, but she has since been released. And those are problems that we're going to see again this coming spring and this coming summer. The crime is just not stopping.
Yeah.
I think what baffles me is, look, Hugh Clements and Steve Perry they are the epitome of law enforcement. Perry was the colonel of state police. He's about my age. I knew him as a young trooper. Hugh Clements has been there like 140 years. What I don't get is, but Jorge Elorza is no Eric Adams, right? So you wonder when the mayorship changes, how that's going to change. Because Elorza, and I haven't talked with Steve about this. I know him well, but some days I'm like, dude, how do you work for that guy? As a law enforcement guy, because that Elorza at times has told them, stand down, or let's see if we can work this out, or whatever. And it's blown up in his face. So I'm interested to see what happens with the new mayor, but that's still a whole year away. What's going to happen? And what is the marching order to the rank and file? I don't cover Providence closely enough to know, but you would think with that leadership in place, they'd be able to do more, for lack of a better term, cracking heads, which is what Elorza probably doesn't want because it's bad optics. I don't know, Steve, what do you think? You've covered Hugh and Steve Perry forever.
Not forever, but just to step back a second, notwithstanding the contract that was just agreed to with the firefighters, we heard for a long time from both police and firefighters that the administration does not have our backs. And I think that's still the feeling among the police, certainly, that they feel that they're not being backed up. And as you point out, that's a fair question, is how the law enforcement professionals are lining up. It's their bread and butter is to follow the orders of the mayor. I'm not, we'll point out, Hugh Clements often takes pains to point out, at least, as far as the homicides go and so forth, by and large, these are among people who know each other. They're not random crimes. The ATVs is as much a quality of life thing. There's, the one instance of the poor woman that was attacked by the rider is the real exception. We've never heard of that sort of thing before, I don't think. So, quality of life it goes a long way. And, they've tried, as far as the ATVs go and other, quality of life issues, to get a handle on it. But it's like whack-a-mole, you try to deal with what pops up, and it just keeps popping up here and there. So, crime in Providence, as Alexa, you rightly point out, is ever present, and just like every other city in the country, and it's an ongoing thing. I don't know that there's any cities where there's a relative I don't know. There probably are safer cities, but there certainly are more dangerous cities. But Providence is not unlike the rest of the country, I think. And, to go back to what your introduction, Bill, Providence is the straw that stirs the drink. It is the center of the state. It is, what happens in Providence does have a statewide impact. It may be minimal in some communities, but it certainly is a perception issue of how people perceive Providence as crime. My colleague, Tara Granahan, famously refuses to go into Providence, she says, because she doesn't feel safe. I don't think any of us don't feel safe in Providence, but it's how you perceive things, and it's a personal feeling, really, how you react to what you see on the news, what you hear on the news. If I get assaulted tomorrow, that all bets are off.
Yeah, anything can happen, that's for sure.
Steve, I always thought our best chance was getting hit by a ripped bus chasing somebody out of federal court. That was my greatest work.
It'll happen. I mean, it's almost happened.
Last topic here, kind of broadly speaking, looking to 2022, we saw a major shift in the General Assembly in 2020 with the introduction of new progressive candidates and obviously Nick Mattiello losing House District 15 and the rise of Joe Shekarchi. And we saw some things policy-wise or law-wise happen inside the General Assembly as a result of that in 2021. But how does 2021 tee us up for 2022 in terms of both inside the State House and then also the electorate itself? The political cooperative is there as well as other progressive groups. But we saw in Senate District 3 in the special election that Sam Zurier, the person who really spoke to the needs of that district, was able to defeat Gina Pham and the other candidates, Brett Jacob, that brought a national-oriented progressive agenda to the table. What are we looking at and going into 2022? What are the core issues and dynamics that'll be at play that we might have learned something from 2021 to predict?
I just want to go back to your premise, which is to say, just take issue a little bit.
Yeah.
It only takes one when you knock off a sitting speaker, but when you say a major shift, I don't know that we've seen that major shift in terms of the policy and the legislation that's come through. And the other thing is, that's presuming you're going back into the State House. I don't know if that's a settled issue as far as the Senate goes, whether they'll come back. Right. I think it's been a very moderate shift politically. You did knock off, the sitting speaker was knocked off. And so it did cause a shift. And Joe Shekarchi has brought a whole different attitude, say, to his speakership. But to hear a lot of the progressives tell it, they only got a little bit in the truncated session in 2021. So for more, we'll see. I don't know how it does set it up for the following year.
Yeah, I also think that Joe Shekarchi has a big balancing act to do, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't see the fall. Remember the fall session? We're going to come back. We're going to talk about marijuana. We're going to talk about Policeman's Bill of Rights. And then there's so much pressure to come back now because McKee's put forward the 10% that he wants to get out the door. The last thing Shekarchi wanted was to gather everybody and then have all the progressives standing up and yelling at him like, why haven't you done anything, right? So it'll be interesting to see going into 2021. I totally agree, Steve. It's a different day than it was with Mattiello. But how much – look, we're going to be going into an election year. And there's some people who just are not going to sit in the back and be quiet, little representatives and senators. We've already seen that coming out, saying some stuff that it's not wild, but it's kind of outside the norm of what's going on. And they want to blow up the process a little bit, as I think some progressives do on the national end too. So, but I don't see this big wave taking over. Ultimately, we'll find out in November. Alexa, what do you think?
Yeah, I think what the political cooperative is doing, though, is showing that there is an appetite to address these social justice issues. I talk about housing and homelessness issues, but, spending those ARPA funds now, immediately, getting them out to families. And like you said, marijuana. I mean, when is that going to pass? So I think that what they're doing is there's a slate of candidates that are going to apply pressure like, Shekarchi hasn't seen, like McKee hasn't seen. Will they take over the entire State House? That's yet to be seen. One other interesting thing that we haven't talked about that I am really interested about in 2022 is the hospital merger. It's something that we've been covering at Globe Rhode Island quite a bit. And for the umpteenth time, Lifespan and Care New England, the state's two largest hospital systems, are looking to merge. And this latest iteration was pushed by former Governor Raimondo, who asked for an in-state solution. McKee has been pretty mum on the topic and hasn't said, where he stands on one side or the other. But one thing that progressives, and I will say, the more conservative parties are thinking is this could possibly raise cost of care, and it might not actually help quality or access because they're going to have 80% market power. On the flip side, those who aligned themselves with Raimondo think that an in-state Rhode Island solution is the best plan.
That's a great point. What a major topic that was, I just totally overlooked in kind of thinking of this. And I just spoke with Peter Nerona, Attorney General Nerona, like 2 weeks ago here on B-Town about this topic. And maybe the reason that I overlooked it is because he said, look, a decision is going to come in 2022. We've assessed it. There's really nothing to talk about until then. But once that decision comes, it's going to be fascinating to see just how much of a shift in healthcare there will be here in the state. Because as you mentioned, that's an 80% near monopoly. Yeah, you've got South County Hospital that's an independent, and you've got Westerly Hospital, part of the Yale group. But that'd be wild to have this massive trifecta, if you will, in Rhode Island healthcare.
But the federal money has papered over a lot of their financial problems. They have deep financial issues. Care New England more so than Lifespan, but those aren't going away. So if you don't, and we talked to the governor and Speaker and Senate President when I had him on Lively Experiment in September. If they don't merge, and I understand mergers always bring perceived job layoffs and all of that Alexa's talking about. If you don't do that, what are you going to do to address that structural deficit? It's not getting any better. I'm glad I got nothing to do with that decision because it seems it's going to be nobody's going to be happy regardless of what happens. But
yeah,
I think one reason we didn't pay much attention to it is we've seen this movie before. I don't remember how many times. It has not come to fruition for a myriad of reasons. And it may or may not. It seems, the governor's control but the governor's input comes via the Department of Health, which shares the responsibility for yay or nay on the merger with the Attorney General. So that's where his input comes from, and he's been pretty passive about it. So, it's hard to gauge whether this is the time that it comes off. But as Alexa rightly points out, it's going to have a major impact on healthcare and how we pay for healthcare. Do we adopt new systems for paying for healthcare? Do we go toward a single provider? I mean, it's a single healthcare provider, basically. As you point out, it's the lion's share of the Rhode Island market would be comprised of the joint entity between Lifespan and Care New England. So, does that open the door to a major shift in the way we pay for healthcare?
Steve, I agree with you. Don't talk to me until you book the banquet hall and set out the wedding invitations. All right. How many times have we seen this engagement fall apart? Let me know when we're going to Rhodes and the Patuxent, and then we'll all be there for the ceremony, right?
Alexa, please.
Sure. Like you said, Jim, both systems have financial ramifications. And the last time I spoke to Dr. Finale, who's the president and CEO of Care New England, he said that if this merger does not pass, he's worried about Women and Infants Hospital and how that will hold up. Are they in the red? What's that going to look like? The leaders of both these systems and President Paxton at Brown University, which has dedicated, or so they say, $125 million toward this merger over the next 5 years, that this merger and this integrated academic medical center could put Rhode Island at the forefront of healthcare. It could help clinical trials. It could be good for population health. And we know that Brown University and Lifespan are going to be applying for an NCI designation for the Cancer Center, which would be huge. And it would be a great economic driver for the state. However, with that being said, what are those ramifications when the merger doesn't go through or does go through? And if it doesn't this time, like you said, Steve, do we have a plan for healthcare and how it operates in this state?
Yeah, major questions, and it'll be interesting to see. Perhaps a year from now, that'll be one of the top topics of 2022, in addition to who wins a gubernatorial race and all the other major elections that are taking place. I think my main takeaway looking back on this year is just it's just been such a weird ride with everything happening with obviously the COVID ebb and flow, the rise of Dan McKee, all of these things. In some ways, it's felt kind of surreal. I don't know if that I guess that's sort of my last question. Has this been a weird year in the business, so to speak?
I think we went from a very negative outlook in 2020, and probably rightly so because of all of the ramifications of because COVID just drove our lives entirely in 2020. We turned more hopeful in 2021, and I think only to see some of those hopes dashed by the rise of the variants and the prospect of new restrictions or the return of restrictions. So in that respect, I think it's made things weird. People weren't entirely ready to go out and travel, go out into public, go into restaurants and so forth. So, I mean, given how strong how large a factor the travel and tourism is in Rhode Island and what it means to the economy, that I think made a major impact on the total uncertainty of 2020. We went from a very negative 2020 to a very uncertain 2021. We did have the return of music in Newport, and I was happy to be there to document it and be a part of it. But it wasn't the whole story, certainly. And we're left here at the end of 2021 easily with as many questions as we had at the end of 2020. I mean, at least, at the end of 2020, we had a vaccine finally, and was starting to go into the arms of healthcare providers and first responders and that sort of thing. Now, a large portion of the population is vaccinated, if not fully, but on the road to that. But they'll have the resistance. And again, I keep thinking of, you can't think of COVID and what it's meant to our society without thinking of the political overlay to it. It's been just, it's perplexing. It's hard to fathom that we're left this way in our society because of the political to and fro that's still tearing us apart, I think, at the end of 2021.
Yeah.
So I'd like to be more hopeful. I'd like to be more hopeful.
Well, we've been doing this long enough, Steve, that I just don't really have expectations anymore. I had one of your former bosses when I had, I've had a good relationship with WPRO, but when we launched the Hummel Report, she sat with me, the general manager, and said, "So, Hummel, what are some of the top stories you think you're going to be covering in the next year, whatever it was?" I'm like, whatever comes our way, it's the news. I mean, how can I predict what's going to happen? So we look back a year ago and we were hopeful. And look, we're in a lot better place than we were. You remember all those ridiculous diagrams for getting together for Thanksgiving and you had grandma out in the garage and all that insanity. We're in a great place now, but the science changes, the variants come. And so will it be better 6 months from now or a year from now? I agree with something you said earlier. I think we're going to be dealing with this for a couple of years, a couple more years. We will live with COVID and how to manage it rather than eradicate it, because we have a whole segment of the society that doesn't believe that the vaccines are going to be the way. So that's a whole nother discussion. But I just, when they say, what are our predictions for 2022? I'm not in the prediction game anymore. I'm hopeful things are going to get better.
Can't do it.
Yeah. Well, and you know what, Bill, save the tape, because a year from now, we'll all be like, oh, yeah, I wasn't expecting that. Right.
That's right. That's right. Alexa, you get the final word here.
Sure. I think that there's a lot that we can actually look forward to when it comes to good news too. PPAC, the Providence Performing Arts Center, is open at full capacity. Granted, you have to wear a mask. You might have to show proof of vaccination or a negative test, but it's open. And it's a huge economic driver and brings a lot of people into downtown Providence, which is where I live. I'm finally seeing the city open up again. Restaurants are opening or reopening for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. And frankly, Rhode Islanders are resilient. I think that there's a full recovery on its way, but it's a long way away. And if leaders are strategic, Rhode Island has an opportunity of using those, $1.1 billion of federal funds that were just sitting in our bank account.
Yeah, completely agree. Alexa Gagosz of the Boston Globe's Rhode Island section, Jim Hummel of the Hummel Report. Also, of course, you can see him every Friday and repeat on Sunday on Rhode Island PBS for a lively experiment. And of course, from time to time on WPRO, Steve Klamkin, WPRO News, also the host of Steve Klamkin Interviews, your podcast of sorts on 99.7 WPRO.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been great.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Rhode Island's podcast of record, B-Town.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.